NZIER is the latest group to call for the government to provide better information on the risks posed by extreme weather events fuelled by climate change. To talk about that, I'm joined by Climate Change Minister Simon Watts. What do you make of this proposal from NZIER that there needs to be some sort of standardised, consistent standard framework for kind of measuring the impacts and the costs to property mainly from climate change, induced weather events?
Yeah, well, look, I think it reflects the reality that the impacts of severe weather events have a significant impact on our communities, but actually more broadly a significant impact fiscally for the Crown's balance sheet, and particularly as you look long term. These events are occurring more often and we need good, strong data in order to be able to inform that decision. We also need to move and have a very strong planning framework that overpins and sits above all of that, so that we move from sort of reactive response to these weather events to a more coordinated long-term approach, because it is going to continue to happen, and so we need to be able to be much more strategic on how we deal with it.
Because the insurer IAG, the group, had approached the government back in 2022, the previous government obviously, with a kind of a three-step plan, and saying there needed to be, again, much more consistency and also a clear view around where to build and where not to build. Do you, from your perspective as Minister, is that in place yet, or how much work needs to be done so that we stop future problems with property that might be built in flood-prone areas even today?
Yeah, well, look, we're 45 days into the new government. What is clear is there is a significant work program required in order to put in place the building blocks for us to be able to manage the impacts of severe weather events and climate adaptation. I've seen this and have reinforced to officials that this is a significant priority as Minister for Climate Change, and I am wanting to progress work, particularly around a climate adaptation framework that provides that strategic wrapper in effect over and above, that in effect brings together the key entities, which is your local government entities, your Maori iwi communities, which are at the forefront of climate and weather events because of their geographical positions, banks and insurers, and central government, and I'm working on that and hopefully be able to announce a little bit more about that soon. But it is a critical part that is missing, and the government previously talked around the climate adaptation bill, but we never had anything tangible in that regard, but we do need to progress it.
How urgent is it?
It's significantly urgent. We saw that reinforced. We're now 12 months on from the weather events that in effect had catastrophic impact both in Auckland but also in the Gisborne and Hawke's Bay areas. 12 months on, time travels fast, and we still don't have that strategic framework in place. And so it is a significant priority. And I think it's a significant priority in terms of the Crown's fiscal exposure as well. I've said many times this is one of the most significant risks to the Crown balance sheet, particularly as you look 20, 30, 40 years out from now. And so it's incumbent upon the government of the day, which is us, in order to put those things in place. And I'll be doing that collaboratively with the industry, with private sector, with banks and insurers, with Maori iwi, around pulling together that framework, and in a manner in which is across party as well, because we need a bipartisan position around that. It needs to be sustainable, and it needs to be able to develop and grow as we do as well.
I think this latest report too, though, makes the point that it's also equal risk to, households and business balance sheets, particularly those who might have property that's at risk either from rising sea levels or flooding or slips caused by. And the argument seems to be that a standardised sort of framework would enable property owners to be clear about just how much risk they faced. And so how important do you think it is to involve, individual property owners, businesses, households?
Well, look, the position is that we need, a lot more information and availability of information. If we can get that in a standardised manner that allows individual households to be able to, manage their own risk, or at least get an assessment of terms of where their risk is, I think that's an important aspect, and it's reasonable that they should be able to get that perspective, but also their ability. We support devolution, and we support that local communities know their local issues best. and we need to be able to get that fine balance between, a national planning framework and principles around that, and the ability for local communities and local households to execute the changes that are required in order to mitigate that risk. And so that's the balance that we need to work through, and that's the work that is underway at the moment.
Because isn't there a risk, I guess, to the government's fiscal position is that if property owners, particularly households, don't have that sort of information, then they're just going to think, oh, well, the government's going to sort this out. They're going to step in if we get into trouble.
That's right, and we've all got a role to play in terms of dealing with this. This is a risk that is, it's actually an issue. It's happening to us already, and so it is incumbent upon us to act around that. I think there's another component as well. I mean, the government is a significant, in effect, market maker of infrastructure investment that in some ways is able to mitigate some of the climate risks around that. And so in terms of the government's ability to put in place resilient infrastructure that mitigates the impact of climate impacts, in effect allows the private market to be able to insure. Because sometimes when insurers say they're not going to insure, that's because they're unable to price that risk. And so we've got to be cognitive of that market dynamic as well, and also the role in which the Crown and local government plays in that. But again, we have to do that as a system-wide response together, and that's the work that we're looking at.
So will you work out, I guess, some principles around making some of those decisions? I mean, it might be whether you build a flood bank here to protect those properties, the cost being this much, but maybe over here the cost of building that same flood bank is going to be way up here. I mean, so how do you, I guess, make those trade-offs to say, well, it's worth doing it here, but we won't do it there, and therefore you might be looking at managed retreat?
Yeah, well, that reinforces the current state. We don't have clear principles or a guiding framework to enable us to even quantify the range of options and decisions that we have in front of us. You mentioned managed retreat. That is one option on a paradigm of options around how people, prepare and prevent and adapt in terms of the risk. Managed retreat is at one end of that. But we need a clear framework so that at least individuals and communities understand where they sit on that paradigm and the options available to them. I think we have to be careful, though, not to try and micromanage every single outcome, because that's not physically possible, and nor should we. But we should have some of those guiding principles. And those guiding principles have to ask the really difficult questions around compensation for loss. The challenge that we have at the moment without a framework is that decisions are made because they need to be made, say in the Auckland situation or in the Hawke's Bay, but we do risk setting precedent in terms of some of those fiscal decisions in particular that may or may not cause implications for us long term because of the scale of the issue at a country level, and that's something that I think is important for us to mitigate through a clear framework.
When would you want the framework to be developed? How soon?
I'm progressing this as fast as possible, and we'll hopefully be able to provide some more guidance on that soon. But as I said, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when that next event comes, and it is incumbent on us to have that framework in place, as fast as possible, in parallel with the capability to be able to deliver and execute upon a localised event. So we have to be able to deal with the emergency response phase effectively. But in addition, we need that planning framework in place as well.
Simon Watts, thank you for your time.
For more content just like this and all the latest business and political news, head over to mbr.co.nz.